Hello everybody. We want to talk about what's on the front page of every Canadian newspaper right now, which is tariffs and the tariff deal that was struck with the Trump administration. Canada has agreed to put $1.3 billion into border security. That is an incredible amount, and everybody within the immigration community is asking, what does that actually mean? Because that number came with no reports, no planning, and no ideas of what's going to happen. So we're all kind of left guessing, and we want to talk about that today. Elizabeth, what do you think that's going to mean?
Well, I want to note two things. First of all, even though the Trump administration has said that we need to stop the flow of fentanyl, etc., criminals, etc., going to the US, neither US nor Canada have exit controls. What does that mean? That means that when someone is leaving Canada, Canadian border guards are not there to stop them. It's the US border guards that are there to assess whether or not they should enter the US. And the same thing goes around with the US. When someone is leaving these states and coming into Canada, there are no exit controls for the states. They just come across the bridge, and it's the Canadian border guards that are there to assess whether or not they should be allowed to come to Canada. Second of all, Canadian border guards right now have a lot of time on their hands. Why? Just very recently, because of a lot of American influence, the Canadian government stopped what is called flagpoling. What's flagpoling? It's when someone goes to the US, comes back to Canada so that they can make their Canadian immigration application at the border. And this has been a practice for many, many decades. But just recently, this stopped. What does this mean? That means that the border guards now have very little to do with immigration. So we have a lot of money being added to place for border security, a lot of border guards who have a lot of time on their hands. And people are not going to be laid off at the border because the Trump administration wants to see that we have a lot of personnel dedicated to this at the border. So what does all this mean? A lot of time on people's hands, a lot of money being pumped into stopping people from coming into Canada.
Yeah, I think the great irony of this is that the whole point that this was made by the American government was to fortify the border for America. But I think what's actually going to happen, as you put it, is it's going to be fortifying the Canadian border. And what will happen is that border is going to become extremely, extremely heavily policed by the Canada Border Services Agency. And as you mentioned, they're moving away from immigration roles into completely policing roles. And we're already seeing this increase in power for them. Information sharing agreements in January were extended with the United States significantly. So they now have access to much more data about applications that people had made in the United States as well as Canada.
So basically, if you have had any immigration history in the US, the Canadian border guards now have access to that. If you have had any US criminal record histories, the Canadian border guards, they've had access to that for years, but now they have even more.
They're going to spend a lot more time enforcing that. So, sometimes it was the case where they would let people go. I think those days are over, and you're going to have full comprehensive applications, especially to get temporary access into Canada.
In the past, a lot of people, even if you had a criminal history, you might have been able to come in because there weren't anyone really checking your background. Now, the border guards have a lot of time on their hands. So I think there is going to be a much higher level of scrutiny on Americans and other people who are entering Canada.
This comes with great fear because, as we know, the Canada Border Services Agency, as it's increasing its policing powers, there's no oversight mechanism. And for years and years, we have been talking about ensuring protection from the power of CBSA officers. And they're getting $1.3 billion more without an oversight mechanism.
What does that mean for you? If you want to come to Canada, it is very, very important, especially if you want to come to Canada to work, to study, or even to visit if you have a complicated history, criminal or immigration history in the US. You have to make sure that your applications are complete, your applications meet all of the requirements, and even in those cases where they do, we still see a lot of times when people are interrogated and the border guards may have issues with people coming into Canada, even in those situations. So please make sure that you consult a qualified immigration lawyer from Canada when you're trying to make your way up to Canada.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.